The history books told us a lie, written in the ink of convenience. For decades, the narrative of the Tarim Basin was a tidy equation of migration. Westerners wandering east, bringing wheat and wool to a barren wasteland. But the sand does not care for our tidy equations. In the scorched expanse of the Taklamakan Desert, at a site known as Xiaohe, the earth vomited a contradiction. We found them buried in what looked like upside-down ships, shielded by ox hides, preserved so perfectly by the salt and the cold that their eyelashes still brushed against their cheeks. They didn't look like the people of the East. They wore felt hats, woolen cloaks, and boots of supple leather. They looked like ghosts of the Eurasian steppe, misplaced by 4,000 miles. The cinematic lens of 1970s inquiry would have focused on those European features, the high nose bridges, the fair hair. It fed a mystery of wandering tribes and lost Indo-European explorers. But we were looking at the surface of the grain, ignoring the chemistry of the film. The surprising fact that modern archaeogenetics has forced us to confront is this: these people were not migrants. They were not lost. In fact, they were exactly where they were supposed to be, despite the biological impossibility of their existence. As I stand here, the wind whipping a fine, abrasive grit against the lens of our 35mm Aeroflex, the sun hangs heavy and orange, a low-hanging fruit over a graveyard of wood and salt. We call this the curiosity gap. How did a population remain genetically isolated for millennia in the middle of the world's most famous crossroads? The Silk Road was supposed to be a river of genetic exchange, a churning vortex of DNA. Yet, when we cracked the seals on these boat-shaped coffins, we didn't find a melting pot. We found a time capsule. The heat shimmer plays tricks on the horizon, making the ancient wooden poles of the Xiaohe Cemetery look like the masts of a ghost fleet, trapped in a sea of silt. The grit gets into everything. The gears of the camera, the creases of my notebook, the very pores of our skin. We are looking at a blue ocean of anthropology. This isn't the well-trodden path of the Nile or the Tiber. This is a story of a lost civilization that didn't just disappear. It existed in a state of defiance against the very laws of cultural drift. We've long assumed that civilization is a product of movement. We assumed the Tarim Mummies were the result of the Afanasyevo culture pushing east. We were wrong. The data-driven reality is far more haunting. They were the Ancient North Eurasians, a lineage thought to have vanished at the end of the last ice age, while the rest of the world was mixing, warring, and merging. This pocket of humanity stayed still, watching the world change from behind a curtain of sand. They weren't the pioneers of the Silk Road. They were the last survivors of a world that ended 10,000 years ago. The light is fading now, turning the desert into a study of chiaroscuro shadows. The high-grain texture of the 35mm film captures the skeletal remains of the poplar trees, standing like sentinels over a truth we are only beginning to decode. They lived in a lush corridor of riverine forest that has since turned to dust, farming millet and wheat in an emerald vein, surrounded by a heart of fire. But why did they stop? Why did the genetic clock freeze in the Tarim Basin, while the rest of the world ticked forward? Now, let us peel back the layers of dust and resurrect the truth of this fallen world. The flicker of a kerosene lamp casts long, dancing shadows against the stratigraphic walls of the trench. Here, the intellectual friction begins. When we peer through the microscope at the dental calculus and the charred remains of ancient sourdough, a profile emerges that defies the standard laws of cultural evolution. This is the anomaly. The Tarim people possessed a Western Neolithic toolkit: wheat, barley, sheep, and goats. Yet their blood remained a closed circuit. In most archaeological contexts, technology transfer follows the path of the gene. If you see Mesopotamian crops in a distant valley, you expect to see Mesopotamian DNA. But here, the semantic triple breaks. The subject, the Tarim civilization, adopted the attribute transcontinental agriculture, but produced a result, genetic stasis, that should be biologically impossible in a corridor of trade. When I run the latest paleogenomic data through our models, the results are startling. These individuals are not related to the Indo-European steppe herders who transformed the Bronze Age. Instead, they share 100% of their ancestry with the Ancient North Eurasians, a group that contributed to the Native American lineage and vanished as a distinct entity everywhere else 10,000 years ago. They are a genetic refugium, while the rest of the planet was becoming a blurred mosaic of migration. The Tarim Basin acted as a biological fortress. Imagine the scene captured on high-grain film. A wide-angle shot of the basin, the shimmering heat creating a mirage of water where there is only salt. The 35mm lens pans across the small river cemetery. We see the beauty of Xiaohe being unearthed. The camera lingers on her woolen cloak, not woven on a horizontal loom like those in the West, but crafted with a unique local technique. We must address the myth that has clouded this discovery for a century. The popular misconception suggests these were European invaders who brought civilization to the East. The data-driven human truth is far more complex. They were indigenous to the region, a relict population that had been there since the Pleistocene. They didn't bring civilization, they curated it, cherry-picking the best technologies from their neighbors, wheat from the West, millet from the East, while maintaining a fierce, isolationist social barrier. There is a palpable tension in the soil. We find evidence of conflict, not in the form of arrowheads lodged in bone, but in the desperate struggle against an encroaching environmental death. The isotopic signatures in their teeth tell a story of intellectual friction between their lifestyle and their reality. As the glaciers of the Kunlun and Tian Shan mountains retreated, the life-giving rivers began to stutter. The lush oases were shrinking. The aesthetic of the 1970s documentary demands we look at the textures, the tactile grit of the desiccated wooden coffins, the coarse weave of the felt hats, the crystalline structure of the salt that preserved them. We see a society that was hyper-specialized. They were the masters of the desert fringe, creating a blue ocean economy where no one else could survive. But specialization is a trap. In the late Bronze Age, the Vonglup Tama, the Curiosity Loop, Titans. Why did they not leave when the water failed? Why did they not merge with the expanding Han or the nomadic Xiongnu? The stratigraphic layers show a sudden intensification of ritual. The masts of the Xiaohe cemetery increased in number. Hundreds of wooden poles, painted red and black, standing like a forest of oars in a dried-up sea. It was a standoff with the climate. As the Taklamakan expanded, these ghost Eurasians doubled down on their identity. They became a biological island. The grainy film captures the dust devils dancing between the graves, a cinematic metaphor for a culture spinning in place while the world passed them by. They were the world's first true cosmopolitans in diet, yet the world's most stubborn recluses in blood. The anomaly isn't that they died, it's that they stayed long enough to be forgotten. They existed in the Green Sahara equivalent of the East, a window of time that slammed shut, leaving nothing but salt mummies and a genetic mystery that contradicts every map of human migration we've ever drawn. The end did not come with a scream, but with a whisper of shifting silt. By 400 BCE, the emerald veins of the Tarim had constricted into dry gulches. Our data-driven resolution, pulled from the open context records of riverine flux, reveals a devastating ecological pincer movement. The subject, the Tarim civilization, was undone by the attribute. Desertification and extreme genetic isolation, resulting in the result: total societal evaporation. As the 35mm camera pulls back in a slow, sweeping aerial shot, we see the true scale of the Xiaohe ruins. The grain of the film mimics the texture of the encroaching dunes. The human truth we've unearthed is that identity is often a double-edged sword. Their refusal to integrate, the very isolation that preserved their ancient North Eurasian heritage for thousands of years, became their casket. When the rivers diverted, they had no kin to turn to, no social safety net across the mountains. They were a biological island, and the sea was made of sand. The final frames of our documentary linger on a single wind-scoured face. The salt has frozen, a look of stoic indifference, onto a woman buried 4 millennia ago. We are forced to realize that the Tarim Mummies were not lost pioneers, but a warning. They prove that even the most resilient culture, one that masters the blue ocean of a hostile environment, can be erased if it stops moving while the world turns. This collapse reminds us that our own modern interconnectedness is not a luxury, but a survival strategy. Like the Tarim people, we often mistake isolation for purity, failing to see that the river always eventually changes its course. Next, we will look toward the silent ruins of the North American Southwest, where another people faced a drying world and left behind a puzzle, written in stone.